It's present. I'm browsing.
Well, that auction set record prices for many artists. It also connected art artifacts with financial speculation in a way previously unimagined. By 1981, one of the big two auction houses, Sotheby's, was active in 23 countries and had a contemporary art market throughput of 4.9 billion old US dollars. Soon, global trade fairs mushroomed. Commercial galleries flourished, and a sliver of branded artists lived like mid-20th century media oligarchs. By 2006, complex financial trading technologies were using art artifacts as an asset class, and most public modern art museums were priced out of the contemporary art market. In retrospect, we wasted an enormous amount of time and effort convening financial resources to purchase and publicly own vastly overpriced goods. And we wasted time wooing wealthy speculators for sporadic gifts and donations, too.
That connects. It was the same locally. The conflictual ethical demands in early modern art museums were systemic and obviously unsustainable. Reversing the resource flow and using transaction tax to nourish public domain cultural meshwork seems, well, inevitable.
Well, sometimes rethreading is such a wonderful luxury. Anyway, auction houses began to buy commercial galleries, and this dissolved the tradition of the primary, managed, and secondary, free art market. As a consequence, by 2012, the contemporary art market was a true competitive market, with prices for assets falling as well as rising. Various contemporary art bond, derivative, and futures markets were quickly convened, and typically, art asset portfolios were managed through specialist brokerages linked to banking subsidiaries.
I also see some local downturns linked to financial debt bubble bursting, particularly in 2009, again 2024, and again 2028. Market corrections?
Well, probably market corrections and their repercussions. Overall, the market expanded, matured in 2027, and has remained sufficiently resourced ever since. More or less. By 2014, formerly commercial galleries, the primary market, had become a competing meshwork of global auction franchises. By 2025, they began to open branded academies to ensure new assets were produced.
I can see the Frieze Art Academy in Beijing. That was one of the earliest.
The market for contemporary art became, to all intents and purposes, a competitive commodity market, just like any other. Of course, useful for generating profit and loss through speculation, and useful for generating public domain financial resources, but completely divorced from emergent art practice.
This might be a bit of a dumb query, but does Modana feel that in the self-replication of the contemporary art market, that something valuable has been lost from public museums?
To be perfectly honest, no. No, we only experience benefits. You see, through the UN multitude distribution of transaction tax, we are much better resourced, which in turn has enabled us to develop our local cluster and node network. Generally, competitive markets thrive on artificial difference and managed risk. They're just too limited a technology to nurture or challenge or distribute a truly creative art practice. And just take all these private art asset collections built by speculator collectors supported through private donations. Apart from the hyper-resourced, they all ultimately fail. Then they're either broken up and recirculated through the contemporary art market, or, more usually, devolve to the multitude and enter public museum collections. Here at Moderna, we have benefited enormously from a spate of default donations. Consequently, we've a comprehensive collection of contemporary art artifacts through reversion.
Then this was the basis for the amazing Moderna Contemporary Art Exhibition in Shanghai in 2024. It was reconstructed as a study module while I was at the Open University in 250. I can still recall it. What a collection. What an amazing exhibition. So maybe here we could locate an ethic approaching something like a critical mass. As Modana Muset's collection, exhibitions, and activities expanded, and of course other museums too, the ethic of public generosity is distributed, nurtured, and also encouraged. Everyone benefits. I can see that when the Ericsson Group pledged its collection, for instance, it triggered a whole avalanche of other private gifts and donations, like the ATSCO, like Kaiser Collections, or the Generali Foundation gift. Or like when the Guggenheim franchises collapsed as the debt bubble burst in 2018, and the Deutsche Bank executive decided to revert its collection.
We think that's a slightly different case, and certainly of a different magnitude, although it's a common trajectory for many public-private museum hybrids.
It's certainly true of museums locally. The former Erlen Center of Contemporary Art in Beijing and Mokke in Shanghai, for instance.
That connects. The increased resources and the gifts, donations, and reversions enabled us to seed our local cluster devolution. From 2015, we invested in partnerships with the Institut Maniska i Natvert in Stockholm and with agencies in Tallinn and also Helsinki, with the early reversion of the Second Life Hive and with Pushinskaya in St. Petersburg. We created what was rather fondly termed the Baltic cluster.
From Composite, I can see there had been an earlier experiment with a devolved Moderna. During the enforced closure in 2002-3,
Yeah.
exhibitions were co-hosted with local institutions. There was even a Cosmobillion.
Yeah, and it was always considered something of a success. Distributing and reimagining the collection through the cluster, incidentally, we cut our carbon debt to almost 12, radically scaled our activities. So while developing locally, we also began to produce a wider Moderna Museit network. The first Moderna node opened in Doha in the United Arab Emirates. We participated in the local ecology's restructuring of resources from carbon to knowledge. That was in 2018. In 2020, Mumbai emerged with the Ex Habere 3-year research project in cooperation with several self-organized research institutions. I recall Nowhere from Moscow, the Critical Practice Consortium in London, and Sarai from Delhi. And as you already mentioned, Shanghai launched in 2024 with the landmark Contemporary Art exhibition. Then the Guangzhou node went live in 2029 with La Pâte Maudite, Bataille and the Accursed Share, a really timely exhibition. It explored the distribution of trust and well-being in a general economy, the ethics of waste and expenditure, and the love and terror implicit in uninhibited generosity. Isn't that node's location near your present Guangdong Museum hub, on Ursha Island by the Haiyan Bridge?
We're almost neighbors. As for La Pâte Maudite, much of the source work is still alive and still very present.
We saw you did some restoration to the image server codex recently. Thank you for that.
Pleasure.
Our most recent node emerged in Sao Paulo in the Americas in 2033 through the agency of the Alan Turing Centenary Project, Almost Real Composite Consciousness.
Okay, if I may, I'd like to loop back with you to the 20s and 30s. It's when many academic historians think we entered a new exhibitionary golden age with Moderna. You co-produced a suite of landmark projects, many of which are still present.
We're not too comfortable with the idea of a golden age. Maybe our work became embedded again. Anyway, if there was a golden age, we'd like to think it started earlier. Maybe in 2018. We set about exploring a key term from early machine logic, feedback. And we made a readdress to the source, the legendary Cybernetic Serendipity exhibition at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London on the exhibition's 50th anniversary.
From Composite, I see Tate has many public domain archive resources. It's recorded as the first exhibitionary exchange between visual art and digital assemblies.
For us at Moderna, that exhibition set in motion 2 decades of recurrent projects exploring art, technology, and knowledge. Its most recent manifestation, linked to the Turing research, has resulted in Moderna 3's cooperation on a draft amendment to Article 39 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. We are seeking to extend certain rights to organic, synthetic, composite intelligence.
You were co-producing